The fear did not arrive as a sudden storm might, with thunderclaps and a deluge of panic. No, in the 19th century, the fear of premature burial seeped into the collective consciousness of Europe and America like a slow, insidious fog, chilling the bones of society from the peasant to the prince. It was an era of magnificent scientific progress, of steam and steel, yet it was shackled to the profound and terrifying uncertainties of medicine. Doctors, for all their newfound pomposity, could often mistake a profound cataleptic trance, a deep faint, or a coma for the cold hand of death. The line between the here and the hereafter was gossamer thin, and to be caught on the wrong side of it was the stuff of universal nightmare. This dread had a name, taphephobic. And it was this very phobia that gripped the heart of Alistair Finch, a bookish and melancholic cartographer of some minor repute in the smog-choked city of London. His was not a fear born of superstition, but of cold, hard reading. He had consumed every medical journal, every sensationalized account in the penny dreadfuls, every sober report from the continent. He knew of the cases where exhumations, ordered for legal disputes or simple familial doubt, revealed coffins wherein the occupants had twisted in futile final agony, their fingernails torn and bloody from scratching at the lid, their faces frozen in a silent scream. Alastair's own existence was a monument to this fear. His townhouse, a dimly lit affair perpetually smelling of damp paper and dust, was a library of the macabre. Treatises on thanatology, the study of death, were stacked beside pamphlets advertising safety coffins, bizarre contraptions with bells on strings, feeding tubes, and even emergency air vents. He was a subscriber to the Safety Burial Society and carried on his person at all times a signed affidavit demanding that his physician, Dr. Ambrose, take every possible precaution before declaring him deceased. It read, "I wish for my arteries to be opened and a feather held to my lips for no less than 1 full hour." His sister, Eleanor, a woman of practical and stoic disposition, watched his decline with a mixture of pity and exasperation. "Alastair, you are a young man of but 35 years. You are in possession of a sound constitution. You are more likely to be struck by a runaway carriage than to fall into a death-like trance. Statistics, dear Eleanor, are a cold comfort to the 1 in 1,000. Alastair would reply, his finger tracing a line in a German medical text. "Listen to this. The case of Frau Elsa Wegner of Hamburg, pronounced dead of a congestive chill on the 15th of October, 1843. Upon exhumation 3 days later, mandated by an anonymous tip, the body was found turned upon its side, the shroud gnawed upon in desperation. You see, it is not mere fancy, it is documented." His paranoia reached its zenith following a particularly severe bout of influenza. For 3 days he burned with fever, drifting in and out of consciousness. When the fever broke, he was left weak as a kitten, his body frail, his mind a haunted house. The illness, Dr. Ambrose assured him, had gone, but the idea had been planted. What if it returned? What if at next time it induced a state so profound that it mimicked mortality? It was in this weakened state that he received a letter from an old university acquaintance, a man named William Crowe, who had made his fortune in the American colonies and had since returned to a large estate in the English countryside. The letter was an invitation to convalesce in the fresh, clean air of Suffolk, far from London's miasmic Thames and coal-fouled skies. "The dead are quiet here, Finch, and the air is full of life. Do come." Eleanor, seeing a chance for her brother's recovery, practically packed his trunk for him. And so Alistair Finch, armed with his medical affidavit and a small personally modified safety bell, embarked on the journey to Blackwood Manor. The estate was everything London was not, vast, green, and silent, but for the sigh of the wind through ancient oaks and the distant bleating of sheep. William Crowe, now a robust and jovial man with a booming laugh, greeted him with a firm handshake that made Alastair's own frail bones ache. "Finch, good God, man, you look like death warmed over. We'll soon fix that." The manor was old, its foundations laid in the time of the Tudors. It was comfortable, yet it held a certain Gothic gravity. The portraits of long-dead crows seemed to follow one with their eyes, and the corridors at night were pools of inky darkness, swallowing the light of a single candle whole. On his second evening, after a rich dinner that sat heavily in his stomach, Alastair found himself in the library. William was pouring 2 generous brandies. "I read about your preoccupation in your letters," William said, not unkindly, handing him a sniffer. "Nasty business, that. Can't say it troubles me much. When you're gone, I say." "I once believed that," Alastair replied, warming the glass in his hands, "but the evidence is overwhelming. Why, the great composer Chopin was so terrified of it, he demanded his heart be cut from his chest after his passing. He lies in Père Lachaise, but his heart is preserved in Cognac in Warsaw." William chuckled. "A dramatic fellow. Well, you needn't worry here. We've a small family plot on the grounds, next to the old chapel. My father is there, my mother, a younger brother taken by fever when he was just a boy." His face grew somber for a moment. "Little Timothy, wasted away to nothing. A tragic business." He took a large swallow of brandy, the moment of melancholy passing as quickly as it came. "The point is, Finch, the village doctor here, old Dr. Morris, is a cautious soul. Waits a full 3 days before signing a certificate. Very thorough. And see here," he led Alastair to the large bay window that overlooked grounds. In the distance, on a gentle hill, stood a small grey stone chapel, and beside it a ring of ancient yew trees guarding the iron fence of the family cemetery. The gate is never locked. One could simply walk out. Alastair looked out into the deepening twilight. The scene was peaceful, bucolic, yet his eye was drawn to the cemetery. It looked so final. The headstones were like broken teeth against the gloom. He shivered. That night, sleep would not come. The house was too quiet, the darkness too absolute. His mind, ever his own enemy, began to conjure horrors. The weight of the blankets felt like the earth of a grave. The sound of his own heartbeat thumped in his ears like the pounding of fists on a coffin lid. He rose, lit a lamp, and tried to read, but the words swam before his eyes. And then he heard it. It was faint, carried on the midnight breeze from the direction of the chapel. A sound that froze the blood in his veins. A single, clear, silvery ting. It was the sound of a bell. He sat bolt upright, his book tumbling to the floor. He held his breath, his entire being focused on listening. There was only the wind. It must have been his imagination, a trick of the mind, a fragment of a nightmare heard in the waking world. He let out a shuddering breath, cursing his own foolishness. And then it came again. Ding. Then another, slightly more frantic. Ting, ting. It was unmistakable. It was not the large bell in the chapel steeple. That would be a deep, sonorous toll. This was a smaller, higher-pitched sound, the sound of a handbell, the sound of a safety bell, a phantom ring from the grave. His skin prickled with a cold sweat. Reason warred with primal terror. It was the wind, catching a loose chain on a weather vane. It was an animal knocking against a forgotten tool. It was anything but what his taphephobic mind screamed that it was.
Ting, 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 ting. The rings came faster now, a desperate staccato plea. Someone was down there. Someone was alive in the cold earth, ringing and ringing, begging for deliverance. Without thinking, driven by a horror that overrode all sense, Alastair scrambled from his bed. He threw on his dressing gown, his hands trembling so violently he could barely tie the cord. He snatched the oil lamp from his bedside table, its flame guttering wildly, and stumbled out of his room and down the grand staircase. The house was a cavern of shadows, the portraits now sinister observers of his madness. He unbolted the heavy front door and stepped out into the freezing night. The grass was wet with dew, soaking through his slippers instantly. The lamp cast a feeble, jumping pool of light that made the familiar landscape alien and menacing. Every rustle of a hedge, every hoot of an owl sent fresh jolts of fear through him. But above it all, clear and terrible was the sound of the bell, still ringing from the hill. He began to run, his breath coming in ragged gasps, the lamp swinging wildly, threatening to extinguish itself. The bell was his guide, a siren song of horror drawing him toward the source of its anguish. He passed the chapel, its dark windows like sightless eyes, and reached the iron gate of the cemetery. It stood open, just as William had said. Ting, ting, ting. The sound was louder here, echoing amongst the headstones. It was coming from the newer section of the plot. He staggered between the graves, his light falling upon names and dates carved in stone, the finality of them a mockery of the living sound that filled the air. And then the ringing stopped. The silence that followed was somehow 1,000 times worse. It was a void, an abyss of nothingness. Had he been too late? Had the occupant of the coffin finally succumbed, the last ounce of strength expended in that final frantic ringing? "Hello?" Alastair called out, his voice a thin, reedy thing swallowed by the immense night. "Is anyone there?" There was no answer, only the wind whispering through the yew trees. He held the lamp aloft, its light washing over a simple, elegant headstone of white marble. It was newer than the others, the inscription sharp and clear. He read the name, and his heart stopped dead in his chest. It was the grave of William's younger brother, Timothy Crow, and the dates carved below the name stated he had died not 3 weeks ago. To be continued in Part 2. Did this tale of Gothic horror send a chill down your spine? For more stories that walk the line between history and the supernatural, more accounts of forgotten fears and eerie occurrences, ensure you never miss a chapter. Subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so you don't spend a moment in the dark waiting for the next installment.
Alistair Finch stood frozen before the headstone of Timothy Crow, the oil lamp trembling in his hand so violently that the flame danced and spat, casting frantic, leaping shadows among the graves. The silence was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket thrown over the world. The frantic ringing had ceased the moment he had entered the cemetery, leaving behind an echo that seemed to exist only in the pounding of his own heart. 3 weeks. The words echoed in his mind. The boy had been in the ground for 3 weeks. It was impossible. The body would have... He pushed the thought away, a wave of nausea gripping him. Dr. Morris was cautious, William had said. He waited 3 days. But what if he had been wrong? What if the fever had induced a state so profound that it mimicked death? What if Timothy had awoken in the absolute blackness, in the stifling silence, to find himself trapped? The image was so vivid, so horrifying that Alastair let out a choked gasp. He stumbled backwards, his foot catching on an uneven flagstone, and he fell hard against the cold marble of another grave. The lamp flew from his grasp, and the world plunged into utter blackness as the glass shattered and the flame was snuffed out. Panic, pure and undiluted, seized him. He was alone in a graveyard in the dead of night, crouched beside the grave of a boy who might have been buried alive. The darkness was a physical presence, thick and smothering. Every rustle of a leaf was the sound of shifting earth. Every sigh of the wind was a dying breath. Scrambling on his hands and knees, his fingers brushed against the sharp edges of the broken lamp, slick with oil. He whimpered, a pathetic, childlike sound. He had to get back to the house. He had to wake William. They had to get shovels. They had to dig. The thought was both repulsive and imperative. To exhume a body was a desecration, a horror, but to leave him there, if there was even the slightest chance. Alastair's taphephobic, the very thing that had brought him to this terrifying moment, now demanded action. His fear was no longer abstract. It was here in this soil, under this stone. He got to his feet, blind and disoriented. He took a step, then another, his arms outstretched, expecting at any moment to collide with a headstone, or worse, to stumble into an open grave. He moved in what he hoped was the direction of the gate, his breath coming in short, ragged sobs. And then he heard it again. Not a ringing. A new sound, a soft scraping noise. It was coming from behind him, from the direction of Timothy Crow's grave. Alastair froze, his blood turning to ice in his veins. He dared not turn around. He dared not breathe. The scraping continued, a dry, gritty sound, a sound of earth being moved, the sound of something digging its way out from underneath. A low moan pierced the night, a sound of such utter despair and agony that it bypassed all reason and spoke directly to the most primitive core of his brain. It was not a human sound, nor was it animal. It was the sound of the grave itself. That was enough. Reason shattered completely. Alastair turned and ran, screaming into the darkness, a wordless cry of pure terror. He crashed through the cemetery, thorns from a rose bush planted at the foot of a grave tearing at his dressing gown and skin. He found the iron gate by slamming into it chest first, the impact knocking the wind from him. He fumbled with the latch, his slick, trembling fingers refusing to work, all the while certain that a cold, earth-clotted hand was about to close on his shoulder.
The latch gave way. He burst through the gate and fled down the hill toward the manor, a single, panicked thought driving him forward. Wake William! He did not see the figure detach itself from the deeper shadows of the yew trees, watching his frantic flight with silent amusement. He did not hear the low, muffled chuckle that was carried away on the wind. Alastair reached the manor house, his lungs burning, and hammered on the heavy oak door with both fists, his cries hoarse and broken. After an eternity, a light appeared in an upstairs window. Moments later, the door was wrenched open by a bleary-eyed and concerned William Crow, holding a candelabra. "Finch! Good God, man! What in heaven's name is the matter? You look as though you've seen a ghost!" "The cemetery! I heard it! A bell!" I asked, my tongue freezing once more. William's expression shifted from concern to profound confusion, and then to a gentle, patronizing pity. He knelt beside his friend. "Alastair, my dear fellow, Timothy is dead. He has been these past 3 weeks. The fever took him. It was a tragedy, but it is over." "No, I heard it," I insisted, my voice cracking with hysteria. "A bell. I heard it ringing from his grave, and then a scraping, a moaning. William, I beg of you, for the love of God, get your shovels now." He helped him to his feet, his grip firm. "You were dreaming, Alastair, a night terror. This fear of yours has addled your senses. You heard the wind in the trees or a fox crying. It has preyed upon your mind." He guided the trembling man toward the stairs. "You need rest, a strong brandy, and rest. We shall speak no more of this." "I was not dreaming," Alastair cried, but his strength was gone. The adrenaline that had fueled his flight was ebbing, leaving him weak and shaking. He allowed himself to be led up to his room and put to bed. William poured him a large measure of brandy from the decanter on the sideboard and insisted he drink it. "There now, sleep. In the morning this will all seem like a bad dream." But as William turned to leave with the candelabra in his hand, Alastair saw something.
a smudge of dark, rich soil on the cuff of William's pristine white nightshirt, and caught on the rough wool of his dressing gown a single twisted thorn from a rosebush. The door closed, leaving Alastair in darkness. The brandy burned in his stomach, but it did nothing to warm the cold dread that had now crystallized in his mind. It had not been a dream. The bell, the scraping, the moan, they had been real. But William had soil on his cuff. William had a thorn on his sleeve. William, who had been supposedly asleep in his bed. William, who had spoken of his dead brother with a fleeting moment of sadness that had seemed so genuine. A new, even more terrifying suspicion began to form in Alastair's mind, one that had nothing to do with catabolism and everything to do with cruelty. Was it possible? Was it conceivable that the ringing bell, the haunting moan, had not come from under the earth, but from above it? The next morning, Alastair descended the stairs, pale and hollow-eyed. The bright sunlight streaming through the windows felt like an affront, illuminating a world that seemed too normal, too cheerful after the horrors of the night. William was already at the breakfast table, buried behind a newspaper, looking robust and utterly untroubled. "Ah, Finch, good man, what he look a damn sight better than you did last night. Feeling more yourself?" Alastair took a seat, his movements slow and careful. "William," he began, his voice quiet but steady, "I must ask you a question, and I demand an honest answer." William's eyebrows raised slightly, a smile playing on his lips. "Of course, old boy, anything." "Last night, where were you before I woke you?" The smile didn't falter. "Why, I was in my bed fast asleep, as any sane man is at that hour." "I see," Alastair said, his eyes fixed on William's spotless cuff. The shirt was fresh and clean. The evidence was gone. "And you heard nothing? No bells?" William laughed, a full, hearty sound that echoed in the dining room. "Bells? No, I can't say that I did. Though old Mrs. Dobbins over in the village has a cow with a bell. Perhaps it got loose." He took a sip of tea. "I told you, Alastair, it was a dream. Your mind, plagued by this silly fear, conjured it all. You must let it go. It is a poison." He spoke with such conviction, such easy charm, that Alastair's newfound suspicion began to waver. Perhaps it had been a dream. Perhaps the soil and the thorn were from earlier in the day. William had been out on the estate. It was possible. It was, in fact, far more plausible than the alternative. Yet the memory of that moan was etched into his soul. It had felt so real. Later that day, under the pretext of taking the air, Alastair walked back to the cemetery. In the daylight, it looked peaceful, even beautiful. The headstones stood in quiet dignity, and birds sang in the yew trees. He approached Timothy's grave. The white marble was flawless. The grass around it was neat in trim. There was no sign of disturbance, no scraped earth, no evidence that anyone or anything had been there the night before. He felt a flush of shame. William was right. His fear had made him a fool. He had created a phantom out of the wind and his own terror. He resolved then and there to say no more about it, to bury the incident as one would bury the dead.
He turned to leave, and his eye caught something. Half hidden in the grass at the foot of the grave next to Timothy's, the grave he had fallen against, was a small metallic object. He bent down and picked it up. It was a bell, a small brass handbell, the kind a schoolmaster might use, or the kind that might be attached to a safety coffin. Its clapper was still. And clutched in his hand, cold and real, Alistair Finch knew that the horror was not over. It had only just begun.
The bell felt ice-cold in Alistair Finch's hand, a solid, undeniable weight that anchored him to the nightmare. This was no phantom. This was proof. Someone had been in the cemetery last night. Someone had been ringing this very bell. The scraping, the moan, it had all been a performance, a grotesque and cruel charade designed for an audience of one, him. He looked from the bell in his hand to the serene, sun-dappled grave of Timothy Crow. A cold fury began to simmer beneath his terror, burning away the last vestiges of his shame. This was not the work of some restless spirit. This was the work of a man. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled his bones, that the man was William Crow. The question was, why? What perverse pleasure could his old friend derive from exploiting his deepest, most debilitating fear? Was it mockery? A brutal lesson meant to cure him by showing him the absurdity of his phobia? Or was it something darker, more malicious? Alastair slipped the bell into the pocket of his coat, its silent presence a secret he now held against his host. He would not confront William, not yet. A man capable of such a heartless trick was capable of anything. He needed to understand. He needed evidence, not just of the prank, but of the motive. He spent the rest of the day playing the part of the chastened and recovering invalid. He apologized to William for his nocturnal episode, blaming it on the fever and a troubled digestion. William, magnanimous in victory, clapped him on the back and declared the matter forgotten. "Think no more of it, Finch. We shall have a fine dinner and a good bottle of claret, and all will be right with the world." But Alastair's mind was racing. He needed to learn more about Timothy's death. That evening, as they sat with their port by the fire, Alastair steered the conversation with a delicate touch he did not know he possessed. "You mentioned your brother was taken by a fever, a terrible thing for a family to endure. Was it a long illness?" William's face clouded over, but the expression seemed practiced, a mask of sorrow he could don at will. "It was swift, mercifully. He took to his bed on a Tuesday and was gone by Sunday. The doctor did all he could, leeches, blistering, but the fever would not break. It was as if it burned him up from the inside out. He took a long drink. He was always a delicate boy, not robust like me." "And Dr. Morris was certain?" Alastair asked, feigning a taphophob's concern. "He waited the 3 days?" "Oh, absolutely," he said, a little too quickly. "Morris is a stickler for procedure. Signed the certificate himself. We buried poor Timothy on a Wednesday under a bright sun. It seemed wrong somehow. Such a cheerful day for such a sorrowful task." Alastair nodded, sipping his port. The story seemed straightforward, but a detail snagged in his mind. Leeches, blistering, standard treatments for a fever. But William had said the boy had wasted away to nothing. A swift 5-day fever might cause dehydration and fatigue, but not a dramatic wasting. That suggested something more chronic, more consuming. Later, under the guise of exploring the library's collection, Alastair began a more thorough investigation. The manor was old, and old houses held records. He waited until the household was asleep, then took a candle and ventured into the study, a room he had rarely entered. It was William's sanctum, all dark wood and leather, the walls lined with ledgers and estate books dating back generations. His heart hammered against his ribs. He was trespassing, and the consequence of being caught would be severe. He began with the most recent ledgers, his eyes scanning columns of expenses for livestock, seed, and household accounts.
Then, tucked between a ledger for the year 1842 and one for 1844, he found a thin leather-bound diary.
It was not William's. The hand was finer, more feminine. It belonged to William and Timothy's mother, who had passed away some 5 years prior. His fingers trembled as he flipped through the pages, filled with notes on garden parties, visits from neighbors, and concerns about the weather. And then he found it, an entry from the year 1840. April the 12th. Dr. Morris confirmed it today. The consumption has taken hold in my dear Timothy. He is but 12 years of age. William tries to be strong for us all, but I see the fear in his eyes. We are to take him to the seaside for the air, though my heart tells me it is a futile hope. Consumption, tuberculosis, a disease that truly did waste its victims away to nothing over months, even years, not a swift fever of 5 days. William had lied. Alastair read on, his horror growing with each turn of the page. The entries charted a slow, agonizing decline over the next 2 years. Timothy grew weaker, thinner, a ghost in his own home. William, the robust heir, was often away in London, managing the business interests he had inherited. Then, an entry from 1842. September the 19th. A terrible row today. William has returned from the city with news. He has met with the lawyers. It seems my husband's will was more complex than we knew. The estate is entailed to the eldest son, of course, but there was a separate parcel of land, a profitable estate in the West Indies, left directly to Timothy. William was livid. He argued that Timothy would not live to see the year out, that the property should be managed by him now for the good of the family. My poor Timothy was too weak to even understand the argument. I have never seen William so angry. He said it was a waste, that the land would rot while a ghost held the title. The pieces began to fall into place with a dreadful clicking finality. William, the elder brother, stood to inherit the English estate, but the lucrative West Indian property, a source of significant income, would go to Timothy. And if Timothy died, it would likely be passed on to a distant cousin or revert to the crown, unless... Alastair felt the room spin. He closed the diary, his hand shaking so badly he could barely hold the candle steady. William had a motive, a powerful financial motive. He had lied about the nature of Timothy's illness, because a consumptive could linger for a very long time, but a sudden violent fever, that could carry off a boy in 5 days. He thought of Dr. Morris, the village physician, an old man, perhaps easily influenced, or perhaps paid to look the other way, to ask no questions, to sign a certificate after a swift fever, without looking too closely at a body that had already been wasted by a different disease. And then he thought of the bell. The cruel, cruel bell. It wasn't just a prank, it was a message. It was William's way of mocking the very idea that his brother could have been alive. You see, the trick seemed to say, you hear bells? Because you are a madman. Your fear is nonsense. My brother was dead when I put him in the ground. There was no crime here, only your insanity. But Alastair knew the truth now. He believed that Timothy Crow had not died of a fever. He believed William had helped his frail, dying brother into an early grave. And the bell-ringing performance was not just cruelty. It was a calculated act to discredit the one man who might, by some awful chance, stumble upon the truth. He had to get out of Blackwood Manor immediately. William was not a prankster, he was a murderer who believed he had committed the perfect crime, and Alistair Finch, with his known phobia, was the perfect pawn to be used and then dismissed as a lunatic if he ever spoke a word of what he suspected. He blew out the candle and crept back to his room, the diary hidden under his shirt. He would leave at first light. He would take the diary to the constables in London. It was circumstantial, but it was a start. Dawn came, gray and cold. Alastair dressed quickly, his bag already packed. He would slip out quietly, walk to the village and hire a cart to take him to the railway station. He opened his bedroom door as silently as he could and crept into the hallway. William was waiting for him.
He was leaning against the wall opposite Alastair's door, arms crossed, a pleasant smile on his face. In his hand, he held the small brass bell. He gave it a gentle shake. Ting! "Going somewhere, Finch?" William asked, his voice dangerously soft. Alastair's heart plummeted. He took a step back into his room, but William moved with startling speed, following him in and closing the door behind them. I thought I might take an early walk," Alastair stammered, his mind screaming. "With your luggage?" William's smile didn't reach his eyes. They were cold and flat. "And with my mother's private diary tucked into your waistcoat. I wondered where it had gone. I should have known a snooping, fearful little man like you would go digging where he didn't belong." "I know what you did, William," Alastair said, his voice gaining a sliver of courage from his desperation. "I know about the consumption. I know about the will." "Do you? And what is it you think you know? That I cared for my sickly brother for 2 long, expensive years? That I watched my family's fortune be drained away on quack cures and seaside holidays while he slowly, inevitably died? And then to learn that he, a skeleton who could barely lift his head, was to inherit the only asset that could have saved this estate from ruin? It was unfair, Alastair. It was a waste." "So you helped him die?" Alastair whispered, his back now against the cold wall. "I ended his suffering," William corrected, his voice a low snarl. "And I secured my birthright. A fever is so much quicker, so much cleaner than consumption. And poor Dr. Morris, so grateful for the generous donation to his retirement, he asked no questions." "And the bell?" Alastair asked, his back now against the cold wall. "Why?" William's grin returned, a horrifying predatory sight. That was for you, my friend. A final flourish. I knew of your silly fear. I read it in your letters. When you accepted my invitation, I saw a beautiful opportunity. If the nervous, taphephobic cartographer were to have a hysterical episode, to rant about bells ringing from my brother's grave, who would believe him? Especially when I, the grieving brother, could swear that it was all a fantasy. It would discredit you completely. It was my insurance policy, and you played your part perfectly. But you had to go digging. You had to be more than just a madman. You had to be a nuisance." Alastair saw the murder in his eyes. He opened his mouth to scream, but William's hand, strong and brutal, clamped over his, stifling the sound. He struggled, but he was no match for William's strength. "Don't worry, Alastair," William whispered into his ear, his voice dripping with false comfort. "I'll make it quick. Another tragic fever. It runs in the family, you see. And when they find you, they'll find my mother's diary in your room. They'll think you stole it. They'll think the guilt, the madness of your fear drove you to take your own life. A sad end for a troubled man." Alastair's vision began to dim as the pressure on his mouth and nose increased. He felt a sharp, piercing pain in his side. William was pinning him with one hand, and with the other, he was administering something with a small, sharp instrument. A needle? The world began to swim, a toxic lethargy spreading through his limbs. The last thing he saw was William's face, cold and satisfied. The last thing he heard was the soft, silvery ting of the bell shaken gently before his closing eyes.
Ting! It was the sound of his own coffin lid closing. Ting! It was the sound of perfect, murderous victory. Ting! Then nothing. Epilogue. The death of Alistair Finch was, indeed, ruled a tragedy. A sudden fever, compounded by a known weak heart, had taken him in the night at Blackwood Manor. Dr. Morris signed the certificate with a trembling hand, avoiding William Crow's steady gaze. A stolen diary was found among the poor man's effects, proof of a disturbed mind succumbing to its own dark obsessions. He was buried in the city cemetery in London, far from the green hills of Suffolk. His sister, Eleanor, received a generous condolence letter from William Crow, expressing his profound sorrow that his home had been the site of such a sorrowful event. William Crow prospered. The income from the West Indies estate flowed in, restoring Blackwood Manor to its former glory. He became a respected figure in the county, known for his sound business mind and his charitable nature. He never spoke of Alistair Finch or his little brother Timothy again. And on certain still nights when the wind was just right, the servants at Blackwood Manor would sometimes claim to hear a faint, silvery ringing coming from the direction of the family cemetery. They would cross themselves and whisper about phantom rings from the grave, blaming it on the restless spirit of the poor, sickly boy. But William Crow, sleeping soundly in his large canopied bed, never heard a thing. This concludes our tale of Gothic horror and historical fear. If you were captivated by this journey into the darkest corners of the 19th century mind, please show your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription allows us to unearth more forgotten nightmares and weave them into tales for you. Ring the bell so you never miss a story from the shadows of history.